Cheers, guys! English Rabisco here. And for all those tech-savvy people out there, wasn't it easier to mess around with technology, like all your devices and stuff, and customize it the way you liked it back then? I'm guessing the answer is yes. Lately, the tech companies have caught up and gotten clever and restricted the customers on what they can do with what they bought. Not in terms of legal restrictions, but in practicality. Not only that, they're opening new doors on how they can spy on us and hoard our data. And not only is this hurting the tech-savvy person, it's hurting us, the consumers, the common people. So I'm gonna tell you how technology has become more restricted now than it was then. So it's clear, software customization, or maybe a better way to say it, advanced software customization, is nowhere near as big as it once was. It seemed like it was the big deal in the early 2010s after it became more mainstream. Then it quickly fell out of popularity later on. And I'm talking about stuff like jailbreaking in iOS. When people noticed that iOS didn't have the features that they wanted, like certain apps that weren't available on the Apple App Store, ad blockers, widgets, and more. And Apple has made it much harder to jailbreak iOS. Yes, there have been newer versions of iOS that have been jailbroken, but the whole movement doesn't seem to be nearly as popular as it once was. You see, Apple started adding the features that the people wanted, like widgets and stuff, removing the incentive for people to jailbreak, for better or for worse, depending on how you see it. Not to mention, rooting in the Android community was also pretty big in the early 2010s, but is now essentially dead. Also somewhat similar to jailbreaking, these people would customize their phones and get features they otherwise wouldn't have. And eventually, apps on the Google Play Store could detect if one had a rooted device and could single out them and hide their app to make it harder or maybe impossible to install said app. And the phones themselves are becoming harder to repair. Like many phone companies like Apple and Samsung and so many others have made it harder for the customer to repair the phones themselves. The right to repair doesn't even matter to the tech companies, of course, and they want to restrict that right and block the rights of the consumer. Apple and Samsung, and I'm sure other manufacturers, will lock out third-party parts or even official parts from another phone, from including the same features like Apple's Face ID, stuff like that, or straight up disabling key components of the software, like the camera, despite absolutely nothing being wrong with the hardware that they used to replace the old one with. However, in this case, maybe it's not all doom and gloom. Apple has recently launched self-service repair, in which users can order official parts and repair the phones themselves without having to send it back to Apple for it to be replaced for several $100s, as you know. But what I feel like is the most concerning aspect of technology restriction as of late are PCs, like desktop and laptop computers. As for Macs, they've always been relatively closed, except for Hackintosh computers, of course, in which you can install Mac on, well, not a Mac computer, in a nutshell basically. And of course, a few years ago, Apple eventually transitioned to Apple Silicon processors, and the older versions that can run on the Intel processors that can be installed on non-Mac computers, they're all gonna lose support eventually, and Apple will not support Intel processors anymore on the software. Now yes, probably the main intention wasn't necessarily restricting the Hackintosh phenomenon. I'm sure it was more about increasing performance and speed and stuff like that, but you have to wonder, it might have played a role in Apple's decision to switch to silicone processors. And as for Windows, it used to be the stuff that you can install anything on, you could tweak with all the stuff that you could do, even if Microsoft didn't like it. And Windows was pretty clean, without junk for the most part, until it seems like Microsoft started shoving it down, all the services and Microsoft accounts, down our throats, into like 2012 with Windows 8. But it got worse with 10 and 11 recently, especially 11. Microsoft really tries hard to advertise for other services, even if they might be useful. What if you don't want to use them, like OneDrive, Office 365, so many others just straight up built into the File Explorer, which is like the total backbone of a software. And yeah, data collection from Microsoft is getting worse, especially in Windows 11. Although you can disable it in the setup, Microsoft includes an option so you can get personalized ads or something by collecting your data, which is enabled by default. And not to mention, Windows 11's hardware requirements were probably artificially made to restrict computers from maybe even just a few years ago from using the software, and to make people go out and buy new computers so Microsoft can make more money. Yes, computers that, in theory, could run Windows 11 just fine were essentially blocked off and may become obsolete way faster than it needed to be. And of course, in ZOS, Microsoft is making it harder to change default applications because they want you to use the Microsoft ones. So why? Why are the tech companies restricting what we can do with tech and closing it off to the consumer? Well, there are some few, but very important reasons as to why. First of all, data is one of the most valuable things tech companies can squeeze out of a customer. They can sell it to advertisers, they can sell it to whoever they wanted to. And no, they don't want you to disable the data tracking features that they've implemented in the software. Additionally, they want more control over their products and consumers. Like, these companies would probably like to keep their reputation squeaky clean, as modifications to the software can create security risks, so they're just gonna block it off entirely. Yeah, it's clear that they don't want you to do unauthorized tweaking with the software, and they only want you to use their apps or apps they approve of, not ones that you may want. And the last reason is, especially in the case of the phone companies, or that they want us to pay hundreds of dollars for them to replace it for us instead of being able to fix it ourselves or have it replaced by a third party. What a way to punish a consumer who's trying to save a little money. So in conclusion, there's no doubt that technology has become more closed off and restricted on what we could do with it. And it's clear why the tech companies are trying and succeeding at doing so. You bet when they think of a new idea on how to close off customization, all they see are dollar signs. And this is hitting all consumers, whether you want to mess around with tech and change the software, or whether you are a regular person who wants to not pay hundreds of dollars to replace your cracked screen. And we can only imagine what these companies are going to do to us next. And the only thing we can do is either give in or resist. But to be fair, the big tech companies cannot control every single thing in the products and what we, the consumers, can do with them. And that's all I have to say.